Think about your smartphone for a second. When the battery drops down to that dreaded 1%, what happens?
Right, the screen dims.
Exactly. The screen dims, the background apps freeze, the push notifications just completely stop.
Yeah.
The entire operating system goes into this like incredibly rigid survival mode.
Yeah, it creates an intentional disconnect from the network.
Right. It forcefully shuts down all the external noise just to preserve its core essential function,
The device is basically marshaling every last drop of energy it has to keep the mainframe alive.
which is an incredibly smart design. And today, we are going to look at an ancient practice that acts almost exactly like that low battery mode, but, for the human spirit.
Which is fascinating.
We're talking about fasting. Now, if you look around today, fasting is almost exclusively discussed through a biological lens.
Oh, completely. It's a diet trend.
Yeah, it's intermittent fasting. It's about optimizing your metabolism or triggering cellular autophagy.
Which is just the body's internal recycling program, clearing out damaged cells.
Right, right. But all of that is entirely focused on physical optimization.
But historically, relying solely on that biological lens is, well, it's incredibly narrow.
Totally.
When you look at the source material from antiquity, fasting was never a diet. It wasn't about trimming down for the summer. It was a profound disruptive technology for the soul.
And that is our mission for today's deep dive. We are exploring a fascinating stack of sources to figure out how this actually worked.
Because it's not what most people think.
Not at all. Specifically, we are looking at extracts from the Catholic public domain version of the Sacred Bible. We're going to be jumping into Old Testament books like 2 Samuel, Isaiah, Nehemiah, and Daniel, right through to New Testament texts like Matthew, Luke, and Acts.
It's a huge span of history.
It is. Our goal is to uncover why fasting was considered so completely necessary by these historical figures, the very stark differences between doing it right and doing it wrong.
And there is a very wrong way to do it.
Oh yeah, we will definitely get to that. And finally, how these ancient blueprints can actually be applied practically in your life today.
It is a remarkable journey. We will be connecting the dots between these visceral ancient rituals and their broader implications, like how we process grief, how we cut through the noise of life to seek clarity, and how we understand our own human limits.
So let's start with the sheer intensity of it. Before we can even begin to understand the mechanics of how these figures fasted, we need to look at the why.
The necessity of it.
Exactly, because in these texts, fasting isn't casual. Nobody is skipping breakfast to look better in a tunic.
Right.
It is almost always a visceral response to an intense moment of crisis or, deep, overwhelming grief.
Fasting in these texts is the physical manifestation of a spiritual reality. The ancient worldview didn't separate the body and the spirit the way we often do today.
They viewed them as deeply intertwined.
Exactly. So when words fail, when a situation is so devastating that prayer just feels inadequate, the physical body takes over the expression of that grief.
You see this so vividly in the second book of Samuel. Think about being in King David's shoes for a moment. His infant child falls desperately ill.
A horrifying situation for any parent.
And David doesn't just say a quiet, dignified prayer. The text says he fasted strictly, and entering alone, he lay upon the ground.
He's in the dirt.
He abandons his throne. He abandons his dignity as king. The elders of his house are terrified by this display. They come and try to urge him to get up off the dirt, to eat a meal with them, and he flat out refuses.
It is a total system shutdown. He's putting his physical survival on hold because his spiritual and emotional desperation has entirely eclipsed his needs for food.
Wow.
His body is simply mirroring the state of his soul.
You see a similar reaction with Nehemiah in the Old Testament, too. When Nehemiah gets the news that his people, the Israelites, are struggling and the walls of Jerusalem are broken down, his reaction is immediate.
He doesn't just send a letter.
No. He says, I sat down and I wept and mourned for many days. I fasted and prayed before the face of the God of heaven. He is confessing the sins of his people, and the fasting is inextricably linked to that mourning.
The body is participating in the grief.
Yes.
We also see fasting used as a profound preparation for major trials. It's a way of clearing the decks before a storm.
Like a reset.
Right. In the New Testament, in the Gospels of Matthew and Luke, Jesus fasts in the desert for 40 days and 40 nights before he faces his ultimate temptations.
That's a massive physical undertaking.
It is. Or look at the book of Acts. When Saul, who later becomes the Apostle Paul, is blinded by a vision on the road to Damascus, his entire worldview shatters.
Right, he was literally hunting the people he's now supposed to join.
Exactly. For 3 days, he is without sight, and he neither eats nor drinks. He is completely rebooting his system.
Okay, let's unpack this, because this is where I think a lot of us in the modern world get stuck. Well, if we look at this from a theological perspective, if God is all-knowing and already knows what you want or what you are grieving, why the need to physically starve yourself? Isn't the internal prayer itself enough? Like, why the dramatic physical deprivation?
What's fascinating here is the mechanism of human attention. Fasting isn't about manipulating the divine.
Okay.
It's not a hunger strike to twist God's arm or to prove how much pain you can endure. It is entirely about altering you.
Changing the person praying.
Exactly. Fasting amplifies the prayer by forcing your physical reality to align with your spiritual desperation. I mean, think about what hunger actually feels like. It is a constant repeating alarm bell in your brain.
That's impossible to ignore. Your stomach growls, your head aches, your focus drops. Your body is basically screaming at you to fix the problem.
And in a true fast, every time that physical alarm bell rings, every time you feel that pang of hunger, it serves as a bodily reminder of your deeper spiritual need.
That makes so much sense.
You are taking the body's most basic survival drive, the drive for food, and you are intentionally subverting it. You are telling your own body, my need for connection, for answers, for mercy, is currently greater than my need for bread.
Wow.
It keeps you locked in the present moment of your prayer, rather than wandering off into distraction.
That reframes it completely. The hunger is just a catalyst for focus. The prophet Joel captures this perfectly in chapter 2. He calls the people to return to God with their whole heart, in fasting and weeping and mourning.
But then he adds that crucial instruction.
Yes, he says, rend your hearts and not your garments.
That is a vital distinction right there. In ancient times, tearing your clothes, rending your garments was a public, dramatic display of mourning.
Like a cultural signal.
Right.
Yeah.
Joel is warning them that if they just put on a theatrical show, if they just rip their shirts but don't actually break open internally, the ritual is useless.
It's just performative.
Exactly. The empty stomach means absolutely nothing if the heart remains closed.
And that leads us perfectly into the dark side of this practice. Because fasting is clearly portrayed as this incredibly potent tool for focus. It makes it highly susceptible to being misused.
Oh, absolutely.
The sources don't just encourage fasting. They contain some of the most blistering, brutal critiques of people doing it for the wrong reasons.
This is where we see what happens when a spiritual discipline becomes a status symbol. The texts refer to this as the wrong way to fast, where it devolves into an empty ritual entirely disconnected from actual empathy or justice.
Wait, you used the phrase weaponization of piety when we were looking over the notes earlier. How exactly do you weaponize not eating? It sounds completely counterintuitive to use starvation as a weapon.
Well, you weaponize it by using it as leverage.
Leverage.
Yeah, you use it to gain social status, to look holier than your neighbors, or even to try and manipulate God into giving you what you want while you continue to treat other people terribly.
Oh, so it becomes a transaction rather than a transformation.
Exactly. The ultimate example of this transactional mindset is in the book of Isaiah, chapter 58. It is a spectacular dressing down of a failed fast.
Yeah, the people are actually complaining to God in that text. They're saying, why have we fasted and you have not taken notice? Why have we humbled our souls and you have not acknowledged it?
They feel like they put their coin in the cosmic vending machine.
Right.
They did the difficult physical thing and their blessing didn't drop out.
God's response through the prophet is incredibly blunt there. He points out the massive disconnect between their religious performance and their daily behavior.
He basically says, look at what you do on the day of your fast. You still seek your own will. You demand payment from all your debtors.
You fast, but you end up in strife and contention, and you strike people with your fists.
He literally says, is this a fast such as I have chosen? For a man to afflict his soul for a day, to contort his head in a circle, and to spread sackcloth and ashes?
Which, for anyone unfamiliar, sackcloth was this intensely uncomfortable, rough goat hair clothing. And sitting in literal ashes was a way to broadcast your misery to the whole town.
It was the ancient equivalent of a neon sign pointing at yourself saying, look how spiritual I am.
It is exactly like someone today going on a highly publicized social media detox, but spending the entire week calling everyone they know to brag that they aren't on social media.
Yes.
Like, what is the point if the entire exercise is just a vehicle for your own ego?
There is no point. God is rejecting the fast that is used for human praise while basic human empathy is ignored. We see this exact same critique centuries later in the New Testament.
Right.
Jesus issues an almost identical warning in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 6.
He tells his listeners, when you fast, do not choose to become gloomy like the hypocrites. The text says they purposefully alter their faces, they make themselves look haggard and miserable, just so that it's glaringly obvious to everyone else that they're suffering.
And Jesus says, Amen, I say to you, they have received their reward.
Meaning, if human applause was what you were fishing for, congratulations, you got it. But don't expect any spiritual clarity out of it.
There is a deep psychological insight there. I mean, human beings crave validation. When we do something difficult, we want credit for it.
Of course we do.
Jesus even tells a parable about this in Luke 18 to drive the point home. There's a Pharisee, a religious leader standing in the temple, loudly praying and boasting, I fast twice between Sabbaths. I give tithes from all that I possess.
He is actively comparing himself to a humble tax collector nearby who's standing far off, too ashamed to even look up, just striking his chest and begging for mercy.
The Pharisee is treating his fasting like an accounting ledger to prove he is better than the guy next to him.
And it's the tax collector, the one who doesn't even mention fasting, who actually connects with the divine.
Yeah.
The texts aggressively condemn this performative deprivation.
They really do.
So if God entirely rejects the selfish, look at me fast, what does the right way actually look like? This was one of the most surprising things in the sources for me. Well, the texts reveal that a true fast is less about what you keep out of your stomach and far more about what you do with your hands.
That is the pivotal shift in the biblical narrative. Going back to Isaiah 58, God explicitly defines what he calls the chosen fast, and it is radically outward-looking.
It moves away from internal misery toward external action.
Yes. The text says the true fast is to release the constraints of impiety.
And impiety here isn't just some abstract religious concept, right? It practically means a lack of reverence that shows up in how you treat others.
Exactly. It says to relieve the burdens that oppress, and then it gets incredibly specific. Break your bread with the hungry and lead the destitute and the homeless into your house. When you see someone naked, cover him.
Notice the logistics of that phrasing. Break your bread with the hungry.
Yeah.
The assumption is that if you are fasting, you have a day's worth of food or a day's worth of grocery money that you aren't consuming. Don't just save it in the pantry for tomorrow. Give it to someone who has no choice but to fast because they are impoverished.
That's beautiful logic.
So what does this all mean? Does this imply the physical act of not eating is secondary? Or are we just talking about being a good person and doing charity? Because if that's the case, can't I just buy someone a sandwich and call it a fast?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the physical fast is still deeply necessary, but it must be the engine that drives the justice.
Okay.
It's not an either-or situation. The physical hunger is meant to create empathy. You feel the pang of an empty stomach by choice, which connects you to the pain of those who have empty stomachs by circumstance.
Wow, that is powerful.
The internal contrition, humbling your soul, has to be paired with external charity. The resources, the time, and the energy that you save by depriving yourself must be redirected outward. A true fast bridges personal piety with social justice.
It demands that your private discipline produces public good, but paradoxically, the discipline itself has to remain entirely invisible.
Yes.
In Matthew 6, after Jesus warns about looking gloomy, he gives the ultimate instruction for a true fast. He says, when you fast, anoint your head and wash your face.
He is telling them to look normal, look vibrant, take a shower, fix your hair.
Keep it a total secret. He says, so that your fasting will not be apparent to men, but to your Father who is in secret.
Right.
If you're listening to this, think about the last time you did something incredibly difficult and disciplined. Half the reward is telling people about it.
Oh, easily half.
Keeping a fast, a total secret, forces you to strip away all the ego and rely entirely on the spiritual purpose.
It removes the social reward, leaving only the spiritual mechanism at work.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. How do these ancient blueprints actually function as a tool in your life right now? Because the New Testament takes this practice, which started as an expression of grief or repentance,
Right.
and transforms it into a highly practical, strategic tool for gaining clarity and spiritual power.
The focus definitely shifts. We see this begin with Jesus in the Gospel of Luke. The Pharisees come to him and complain, why do the disciples of John fast frequently while yours eat and drink?
And Jesus answers with an analogy. He says, how can you cause the sons of the groom to fast while the groom is still with them? But the days will come when the groom will be taken away, and then they will fast.
He is establishing that fasting is an act of longing. It's not something you do when the celebration is happening.
It is a tool for times of waiting, used when you are seeking a presence or an answer that feels distant.
And it is portrayed as an actual source of spiritual power. In Matthew 17, the disciples are trying to cast out a demon and they fail completely.
They just can't do it.
Right. Jesus explains that certain intense spiritual battles require more than just casual engagement. He says, but this kind is not cast out, except through prayer and fasting.
By tuning out their physical needs, they are tuning into a much higher spiritual frequency.
Exactly.
But if they were using it as this high-level tool for spiritual warfare or intense focus, how did they apply it to group settings without it turning back into that performative contest we just talked about?
Well, they used it specifically to clear out social noise when major leadership decisions had to be made. Eating together is inherently social.
Sure.
By removing the food, you remove the social dynamic and focus the group entirely on the decision at hand.
You see that perfectly in the book of Acts. In Acts 13, the prophets and teachers in Antioch are ministering and fasting. It's during this intentional, group-wide period of fasting that the Holy Spirit speaks and gives them clear directions.
Separate Saul and Barnabas for me.
Yes, for the work for which I have selected them. They needed absolute clarity on who to send on this massive mission, so they fasted to cut through the noise. And then, right before they send them off, Acts 13.3 says, then, fasting and praying and imposing their hands upon them, they sent them away.
Later in Acts 14, when Paul and Barnabas are establishing leaders for these brand new communities, the text notes they established priests for them in each church and had prayed with fasting.
Whenever a monumental decision had to be made, fasting was the prerequisite to ensure they were hearing clearly. But you have to wonder where the limit is. If it is this powerful of a tool for clarity, why not just fast all the time? Why not become completely ascetic?
And this is where the sources show an incredible pragmatic wisdom. They knew that fasting is a tool and you don't use a hammer when you need a life raft.
They were not fanatics.
That is a crucial point. Fasting is never meant to override basic human health or survival. It is a dynamic practice meant to serve the person, not a rigid punishing rule that destroys the body.
The best example of this is in Acts 27. The Apostle Paul is on a ship, being transported as a prisoner across the Mediterranean, and they get caught in a terrifying multi-day hurricane.
The crew is entirely panicked.
The text says they had fasted for a long time. They haven't eaten in 14 days, essentially out of sheer terror and seasickness.
And Paul, the same man who fasted for 3 days after his blinding vision in Damascus, assesses the situation. He doesn't tell the crew to keep fasting in hopes of a miracle.
He recognizes that they are facing a physical crisis, not a spiritual one. He begs them to eat. He says, I beg you to accept food for the sake of your health, for not a hair from the head of any of you shall perish.
And then Paul takes bread, gives thanks to God right there on the sinking ship, breaks it, and begins to eat in front of everyone.
The text says, then they all became more peaceful in soul, and they also took food. He knew their physical bodies desperately needed the caloric strength to survive the shipwreck that was coming.
We see that same pragmatic wisdom all the way back with King David in 2 Samuel.
Right.
Remember, David was fasting strictly, lying in the dirt, pleading for the life of his sick child. But on the 7th day, the child dies.
And his servants are terrified to tell him. They assume that if he was doing this while the child was alive, the news of the death might push him to literally kill himself with grief.
But David notices them whispering. He asks if the child is dead, and they tell him yes. And his reaction completely shocks them.
He doesn't dive deeper into the mourning.
No. The text says, therefore, David rose up from the ground, and he washed and anointed himself. He asked them to place bread before him, and he ate.
His servants are utterly confused. They ask him, what is this?
David's response is a masterclass in understanding the boundaries of spiritual disciplines. He essentially explains, I fasted while there was still a possibility that God might grant my plea and let the child live. The fast was for a specific purpose.
But now he is dead. I cannot bring him back.
Exactly. The fast has run its necessary course.
There's a really stark pragmatism there. He understood the exact boundary between a spiritual discipline and just destroying himself with grief. He knew it was time to wash, to eat, and to carry on living.
It's a profound balance.
So to bring this all together for you listening, we have journeyed through an ancient landscape today, and we've seen that biblical fasting is so far from just a trendy diet or a public performance.
It really is.
When done correctly, It is a deeply personal, justice-oriented practice. It is meant to align your physical body with the desire for spiritual clarity, for humility, and for charity toward those who are truly hungry.
It is a mechanism that forces you to pause, to disconnect from the constant consumption of the world, and to recalibrate your internal compass so you can actually hear what matters.
And I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over on your own. It comes from the prophet Daniel.
Yes.
In the very first chapter of the book of Daniel, he and his friends are captives in Babylon. The king orders them to be fed with his own rich, luxurious food and wine. But Daniel refuses.
He doesn't want his mind or his spirit compromised by the empire's indulgence.
So he asks the guard for a 10-day test. He chooses to fast from the luxury of Babylon. He asks to be given only roots, vegetables to eat, and water to drink for 10 days.
Just roots and water.
And what is the result? The text says that after 10 days, Daniel and his friends appeared better and fatter than all the children who had eaten the king's rich food.
Furthermore, God granted them incredible knowledge, instruction, and wisdom. They emerged sharper, healthier, and more insightful than anyone else in the kingdom.
By stepping away from the endless feast, they gained a level of clarity and wisdom that the feast itself could never provide.
It's a powerful image.
And it leaves you wondering, in our modern world, where we are surrounded by a constant, overwhelming buffet of consumption, endless food, endless media, constant noise, thousands of notifications,
It's exhausting.
could a mindful, intentional fast be exactly what we need?
Yeah.
Could voluntarily stepping away from the noise be the exact reset button, that low battery mode that both your body and your spirit are desperately craving?